Hello, everyone. I hope your Saturday is going well. Good morning. My name is Julia Scott, and I work with Baltimore Racial Justice Action, or also known as BRJA. And I am a co-facilitator for our 13th of the month event. And this is our April, which is unbelievable that it's already April, our April 13th of the month event. So welcome. Next slide. Just some virtual housekeeping. Videos being on is highly encouraged. However, we also recognize that it's totally up to you. So whatever you are safe with, um, please ensure that you are muting yourself when you're not speaking, just to cut down on background noise and so people can hear everyone. And also that your voice is encouraged and welcome as a participant. In the chat, but also when we're opening up the discussion for Q&As or just like, for what are people's thoughts, particularly I think with this event today talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. So we hope to hear your voice and your thoughts when we're kind of going over this with this lovely woman. And then also content and recording. Obviously, we are recording. This will go on our YouTube channel on BRJA. BRJA's YouTube channel rather, and just to kind of give content given the historic and violent nature of racism in this country and how it's been perpetuated on Black and non-Black folks of color. An examination of history can be challenging. And because of this, BRJA would like to provide a content warning at the beginning of our workshops and public offerings. Because of this U.S. history of violence against Black and non-Black people of color, these conversations might surface for you moments of discomfort, pain, and you can struggle with content. You are encouraged to take care of yourself during the time in any way that you need to. So you are not disrupting this work or these sessions for others. So please take a moment and assess whether you are emotionally ready to participate in at this time. So just making sure you're taking care of yourself as we're, discussing topics or hearing quotes or listening to video. Just, check in with yourself throughout your time with us. All right. Next slide. And so welcome to Falling Forward in the Fight for Freedom celebration of Fannie Lou Hamer. This is actually part 2 of this wonderful topic, relevance for today. So we're really excited to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer and her importance and her words and her work, but also why is it relevant for today's world and society. So move to the next slide. I'm going to have Harriet, who is going to go into some, we did this before, but go into some of the background of Fannie Lou Hamer's life. You got the floor, Harriet.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So last time, so as Julia said, this is part 2, talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. We could have part 3, 4, 5 into infinity. There's so much to learn and discuss regarding Miss Hamer's life. But in part 1, we did a lot of just kind of trivia and things like that in order to discuss some of the just facts about her life and some of the misconceptions about her life. So we're gonna just go over those real quick to kind of refresh our memories, or if we weren't here last time, to give you a little sense of what we did cover last time. So in her early life, she was the youngest of 20 children in her family. She grew up on a plantation in Rulesville, Mississippi. It's a very rural area. As a very young person, I think starting age 4 or 5, something like that, she started picking cotton. And then at some point, she became a record keeper. Again, very young because of her literacy skills. At 28, she married Pap Hamer. And they lived and worked on that same plantation where she grew up as sharecroppers until she began attempting to register to vote, at which point she was threatened with violence, fired, and then because her work is tied to the place where she lives, she was also evicted by the plantation owner. Some other things to know about her life is that she was given a forced hysterectomy when she had surgery for a fibroid, a uterine tumor. say forced, and she was unaware, right? She found out later. So this violence, this medical violence and just physical assault continued after she began her civil rights activism, and she was brutally beaten by white police officers and two black inmates who were ordered to beat her to the point of their own exhaustion. This was after an arrest during her work to get folks registered to vote. She survived these beatings, but had multiple permanent health issues as a result of the assaults, both by medical providers and police officers and inmates. We also talked some about how she's such a brilliant political strategist. So some of the things that we made sure we all knew were that after dealing with poll taxes and racist literacy tests, trying to vote, she got involved in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, giving workshops and becoming an organizer and leader. She was a sought-after speaker. She was one of the architects of Freedom Summer and the voter registration drive that went with it. As a very savvy political strategist, she served as vice chair to the Freedom Democratic Party, which she represented at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. And we heard her speech on the floor last time, and we're going to listen to it this time as well. She was also co-founder of the Women's National Political Caucus, which continues to this day, which is an organization that seeks to support women candidates for government office. And she ran for office twice herself. A little bit more about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, again, to refresh our memories and to segue into hearing her speech on the floor, is that she became known to a national audience in that year when she spoke as a part of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party contingent who went to the Democratic National Convention. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party demanded to be seated to represent Mississippi because they had sent an all-white delegation. The Mississippi Democratic Party was a chief architect of violence and voter restrictions in Mississippi against Black people as well. So every state sends a delegation to either the Republican or Democratic national conventions. They make decisions about what candidates to put up, particularly for president. Mississippi sent an all-white, very racist Democratic contingent. And so she and two other Black women founded a different Democratic Party and went to be seated alongside them or instead of them. Okay, so that's a little refresher. Hopefully that helped. Yeah, it's making me realize how much more there's, just so much more to learn. And I'm excited to dig into these clips, hear her voice from her own mouth.
Thank you so much, Harriet, for doing that. We are now going to watch Fannie Lou Hamer's speech at the testimony before the Credential Committee at the Democratic National Convention in 1964. So we ask that as you're listening to this clip, as we will be showing clips later on, as we kind of pull some important quotes from Fannie Lou Hamer, we want you to kind of sit with, like, what are you hearing? What are some things that are coming up for you as you're listening, as well as any thoughts or feelings you might have, and thinking about like how this might feel for today. What are some things we can take, or you're pulling from her words that are reminding you of today? So I'm going to have them play the clip and listen. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Rooseville, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolman and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Rooseville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rooseville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. And 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, get that one there. And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Vesta Simpson. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir? And they would say other horrible names. She would say, yes, I can say yes, sir. So, well, say it. She said, I don't know you well enough. They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from. And I told him Roosevelt. He said, we're going to check this. And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, you were from Roosevelt, all right, and he used a curse word. And he said, we're going to make you wish you was dead. I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. I was holding my hands behind me at that time on my left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro had beat to sit on my feet, to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He walked over and pulled my dress. I pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
Thank you. Before what we're going to do is we're going to show some quotes, and we're going to also hear Fannie Lou Hamer's voice, through some of those speeches and those clips. So I want you to do the same thing that you did with this one. But I will say, as I was re-listening to this, because I've heard this a few times, for one, I was snapping as if I was there. But for two, what I've always really appreciated about Fannie is essentially her voice. She sounds like a regular person. She sounds like some of my family from down south. Not from Mississippi, but from Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. But she had a very plain way of speaking. She was, what we would call a straight shooter. And so I think that is such a powerful thing. Even when I hear, when we have political folks today speaking, but she was something about her voice that just, you felt everything that she said. You were able to kind of almost picture everything that she's saying, and how I think powerful that is and important that is when we think about people's stories in today's world. Who are we listening to? Who's telling the story about what's happening to them on an everyday basis? So I just wanted to kind of call that out. I'm not sure if anyone had any of their own thoughts about this speech, or if this is the first time they've heard it. But I would love to, if a couple people, if they have any thoughts, or they can put it in the chat, or they can come off mute to share their thoughts about this, about her testimony. Anyone?
So that was so heavy.
Yeah.
And I know that I really was, felt a visceral reaction, right? And I've heard this clip and seen this clip multiple times. not only that, but even though when this happened, I was very young, I have memories of this happening and this being discussed with members in my family, right? With hushed tones and fear and pride and, worry and all of that. Part of my reaction as I heard this was thinking about I think it was like about 3 days ago when 6 white policemen were sentenced for sexually torturing, as well as other forms of torture, 2 Black men in Chicago, who they were pissed to the highest degree of passivity at because they thought one of the Black men was dating a white woman. And they tortured them for 2 hours. And the men had done absolutely nothing wrong. The police just burst into their houses because they could. They were police. And this, which happened in 1964, and I want everybody to note, in the 1960s, she was sharecropping. We tend to think about these things as if they are so far in the past. I was alive then. People were sharecropping on a plantation owned by white people who were exploitive of their labor. This is not ancient history. And so the through line between then and now is that people thought that she was a troublemaker. They thought that she was just an ignorant person. There were people who did not want her to speak because they thought she was just illiterate and ignorant. Not just white people, but some of the learned Black people too, right? But here's the thing. Just as it happened then with her, where she was beaten, she never fully recovered from her injuries, and she died very young, just in her 50s, as a result of the impact of those injuries. This is happening right now. But right now in the United States, what we see, especially in white communities, are people who will just say, but what were they doing before the tapes started rolling? They they were no angels. They had a record. They must have been doing something wrong. Why were they running? There's always the assumption of guilt and troublemaker and rabble rouser. It is easier still in the United States of America to believe that instead of believing that there is something desperately wrong with the system, right? And even though we started out talking about just the Mississippi Democratic Party, who was so racist at the time, the truth was that it wasn't just that party that was racist. It was the state that was racist. It was every single county in the state who were complicit in perpetuating these types of conditions. The racism was in the White House. The racism was in the DNA of the country and is. And the fact that we as a country find it easier just to talk about individuals or a sub section of a state or a country, as opposed to talking about the country as a whole and us, the questions that we ask ourselves, the lack of grace that we give Black people who are being tortured, right? The same grace that we're willing to give Palestinians, Israelis, and any other group of people. That still exists. Those conditions that Fannie Lou Hamer was dealing with still exist in the today America. And that, Julia, is what we don't acknowledge. And that was one of the reasons why hearing this again just hit me so hard.
Absolutely. Yeah, this wasn't that long ago. We're not that far removed, and it's still happening, and we know that it's still happening, and we see the same kind of excuses, and yet her story, the story that she told about her own, the violence, that was done to her, is so similar to what we were hearing and seeing, today. So it's really not that far removed. Thank you for bringing that up, Adar. We are going to go to our next clip, and this is, we're going to kind of start our kind of discussion. and watching. So we're gonna play this, and we want you to listen in as well as you read along. We're all here on borrowed land.
To go back to Africa unless you're going back where you come from. I got a note one day telling me to go back to Africa. And ever since that time, it's the 3 times a week I said, when I'm in a white audience, I said, we'll make a deal. After you send all the Koreans back to Korea, the Chinese back to Chinese, the Jewish people back to Jerusalem, the Koreans back to Korea, and you give the Indians their land back, and you get on the Mayflower from which you come, and you home. Right? You don't agree, but as we all here on borrowed land, then we have to figure out how we gonna make things right for all the people of this country.
All right, so this one is such an interesting clip and quote. I have certainly especially I think in the digital spaces like social media, I have certainly had people tell me to go back to Africa, and I'm always kind of like, oh, I mean, I wish I could, but I don't know where it came from. So that's kind of difficult for me. But this is such a salient point, I think, that we see, like I said, once again, even in today's, kind of, society, not just people still saying things like this or telling people to go back to where they came from, but that the idea that America, just as a country, as a project, is really about people who are not from here being here. Now, obviously, some people come here, through choice. You have folks, early colonizers, they would come here, and they would colonize the land. They, kicked indigenous folks off of their land, with violence, moved them around, displaced, forced, families and groups apart. And they brought enslaved folks over here against their will to work that land, right? To end up building up their economy. And however, this is not a land where people were born. A lot of people who were white obviously were not born originally here. Is what the indigenous folks call Turtle Island. So we know that we're all here. Our ancestry goes back to a lot of different places. And yet there's an idea that this country really only belongs to one group of people, or that the other people who are here, they have a fixed role in what, on this land, right? That if you are Black, you are working this land, you are not to have any of the benefits, but definitely all of the issue. And the same for indigenous folks, who have, their land has been taken from them, and, the way we've been treating the land. And then you have folks who come over who immigrate, here, and they are treated certainly in one way. They come looking for opportunity. And yet, like they're also kind of told to go back once they don't fit in. So we know that we say America is the land of immigrants. We say this all the time. We know that it's a land of immigrants and the enslaved. And yet, only certain people are usually hearing this, right? Like only certain groups are getting told to go back where they came from. And I think it's always just very interesting, especially as we're seeing in our current conservative party, just I think in our government in general, we have a very, extreme right-wing faction that is really just saying this out loud. Like they are not trying to be covert about it. They are being extremely overt about what they think America is, what it should be, the history that we should be learning about, how the story of America is told, which is really, really important, I think, when you are just kind of looking at this from a historical point of view, and you hear someone like Fannie Lou Hamer who was saying, like, well, if we're saying this to me, like, okay, but all of us need to be getting tickets to someplace. And I think that it's important to show that, none of this is new. These things aren't new attacks. This is the same attack that's done in different intensities and different times, right? And that Fannie Lou Hamer, as well as others in the past, were calling this stuff out. This has always been discussed. But what are we thinking when we hear it now? What do we think about what the story of what America has told us it is versus what we're actually seeing in our history, in our news stories, what we're seeing in our communities, what our family members and friends are saying? I think it's important to pay attention to the idealistic version of America, which I think we all kind of have in our head, and the reality of America, and that there is a thorough line of people who have been fighting and telling us the truth for a very long time about what this place is and how it operates. And what does that mean? I think as we're kind of seeing once again an increase, and kind of just anti-Black rhetoric, increased racism, sexism, all of that is happening, increasingly right now. We're in an election year. So hearing Fannie Lou Hamer speak about it in this time period, I think can be very invigorating. So I would love to hear some folks' thoughts.
Chris put something in the chat.
Yeah, I see. I was about to read through it. Thank you, Chris. The last clip I found myself thinking about what it's like listening to this in the present compared to what it might have been like to listen at that time. It being historical makes it feel inaccessible. It feels obvious what the issues are and the solutions, but people manage to feel that it was somehow more complicated at that time. Adar's point of these things still happening now made me understand that the exact same conversation is happening now than was happening then, perhaps in more coded terms. And the second clip is exactly the conversation we hear now too. Just taking that and thinking about what I've thought in my own lifetime was more complicated than it actually was. What things do I believe are complicated now that I'll think in 10 years had obvious answers? We can just actually, we can leave now, because that is actually
Exactly.
it, right?
That is the word.
Yeah, it's like, I think one of the first things that even though, I think the first and the second clip is when she says, someone in Mississippi told her that Mississippi was not ready for that. And that stuck out to me because that is usually the excuse that, like, well, we're not ready for it. Like, it's too much, right? And these are questions, and it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. There's not an answer, right? And so I think that we're talking about treating people as human beings. We're talking about living up to what the law says that it actually is. The Constitution is saying what it actually is for everybody. And I think that if we were to be honest, that no one said that could be an easy thing, right? Which is what I think some of this also with the race. I think it's not an easy thing to live out your ideals, right? But you have to try to do them as opposed to just kind of like, well, it's too much right now. And that is something like when I see what's happening, like, like the don't say gay bills, it's like, oh, well, it's too much right now. It's like, well, I mean, gay people have always been here, right? It's like, for whom? Like,
Right.
it's not anything brand new. You're going to have to get over it. And that's what this country actually is. And yet, what it's supposed to be. And yet we find ourselves kind of fighting that constantly. So I'd love to hear. Thank you so much, Chris, for your thoughts. That was a salient points. Very beautiful.
Can I piggyback on the Chris? Because I'm so moved by that, Chris. We take these issues and say that they're complicated when they're really simplistic. We talk about the ideals of the United States, but let me say here and now very clearly, America has always been a thug. Let me tell you why. Let me ask you a question. How many people know people who live in Texas? Hands up, thumbs up. How many people know people who live in Oklahoma? Hands up, thumbs up. Okay. How many people know people who live in Nevada? Yeah, I don't know nobody in Nevada. Okay, one person. How many people know people who live in Utah? Okay, none of us know Utah. Okay, none of us.
I think one person might.
Okay, one
might.
person. How about New Mexico? New Mexico. Who knows somebody who lives in New Mexico? I know. Okay. Okay. Did I do Kansas? Who knows people who live in Kansas?
One person.
Okay, well, the Wizard of Oz thing, wasn't that set in Kansas? Okay,
Yes.
so we all know the little girl in Toto. How about Wyoming? Anybody know anybody? No, one person who lives in Wyoming. Okay. California. Okay. I said Texas. Great. So what do those states have in common? Okay, I'm gonna give you three
They're
guesses
all
because
like,
this is so juicy. Because this what are you saying,
I was just
Julia?
gonna say like they're kind of closer to the West Coast, but
Okay.
I feel like there's
Okay,
something else.
I'm gonna give you all the biggest hint in the world.
Oh yeah,
They were, yes,
we're going
Harriet.
Mexico.
Okay, Harriet got it. They were territories that were part of Mexico. How did the United States get all of those things? Because they fought a war over it. It was the Mexican War. And then in February, the month that we just left, well, I think it was 1848, there was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And that was where all of the states' territories were ceded to the United States to end the war. It halved Mexico's territory. Halved. This land that we say is borrowed land, it's not borrowed, it is stolen. It's stolen because America has always been a thug. All of this was part of Manifest Destiny and the United States wanting to steal every single part of this continent. It also sparked what was well, a huge spark in the Civil War, because there was this discussion about whether these territories would be enslaver states or would they be free states, right? And that was one of the huge issues back then. So when we talk about like our like living up to who we are, well, this is who the United States has always been, number one. And number two, who benefited from all of that and who lost from all of that? Who's standing on this land? Black people, we didn't just come over here as colonizers. We were kidnapped, stolen, dragged, and worked this daggone land for generations with no pay. And white people want to talk about reparations when our families continue to be behind the eight ball. We don't want to make that connection to history, because we will say for Black people, y'all need to stop living in the past and get over it. But yet we won't say, well, you know what? Native Americans were on this land that we stole, so we need to give it back. But we will support through gazillions in aid and bombs and whatever other people's right to be on a land that God gave them thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And I'm just saying our logic is different. The math doesn't math. We are not consistent. And when we are talking about these issues and history, when we're looking at Fannie Lou Hamer, when we're looking at any other figure, we really have to look at it in terms of the consistency of today. And what we see is that what was happening there with her, with the country then, is the same thing that is happening with the country now. America is nothing but consistent. And that's the thing in terms of our policies, our practices, our processes, in terms of what groups of people benefit and the groups of people that don't. And as long as we continue to look at these things as just history, or as long as we look at it just on an individual level, we are never allowing ourselves to step back and to see the big picture. But then we continue to ask ourselves, well, why don't things change? It is the consistency. And all of these bills, Julia, Harriet and Meredith and Jamie, Chris, Johanna, everybody, Renaud, all of these things that we talk about, we're not going to be able to see because we're not going to be able to legally learn this type of history in the schools. How many people knew about that treaty? How many people had ever heard that? This is American history. And we don't know our origins, which is why we can sit here and say, oh, land of the free, home of the brave, and all of that crap. And I see, Meredith, I saw you and Jamie exchange a look. I'm so curious. What are you all thinking about?
I said, I think I've heard of it. And then Jamie lived in New Mexico and so had a unique perspective. Yeah, so there's the folks that cross the border that have come to New Mexico more recently, and then there's the folks that the border crossed them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, the border crossed them. No truer words. But we don't talk about that when we're talking about issues of immigration, right? That type of complexity and accountability for the United States' actions. That's not what we ever hear about. We only hear about the United States being the hero of their own story. And not the impacts of what that's meant for everything else and everyone else. And we never hear about any of the atrocities. And that is really sad. And there's been language about, of course, about, as Julia said, taking our country back. What do you mean? If anything, it would be Mexico taking their country back.
Yeah.
The country and the territories that the United States stole. Now, people can say, oh, but they were compensated. They received 18 million for these territories. That's like saying that I gave you my house under the gun, which America has also done because it has stolen land from Black people by saying to them that they had to leave before sundown, and then they would throw them $1 and say, okay, you were paid. What choice did you have if you were protecting yourself and your family? So America will tell you the first, oh, but we paid, without telling you the second. It was under duress and people had no choice. So I see comments again.
Yes, there are lots of comments. Just, of course, people talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. She was very technically appealed to America and all of us in borrow. I think that her language even, I think, was strategic in that. And that like schools are already kind of teaching like this white mythology for the most part. And we're seeing that, I think, as we've made some gains. I mean, we can debate those gains, right? Like those are gains we can discuss, like who's actually benefiting. But you see the blowback right now is intense. Where it is like, oh no, like we are not, we got to go back. It's astonishing, but if you know the history, it's not. But it's still like a shock to the system, right? To see this, and to kind of be experiencing it, I'm like, wow, they really trying to get back to the old one, huh? It's kind of wild. So why?
America's being consistent,
and I think that you using that word consistency, like it is consistent. This is who you are. It's like, unfortunately, being in a relationship with someone and being like, wow, it's happening again. It's like, well, it happened the whole other 80 times too. Like this is who you are. And I think that maybe that's also part of this, is accepting. When I would hear about folks who were fighting CRT or DEI, but CRT particularly in like K through 12, which was not happening, that a lot of the fear was like that white kids and that kids would learn to hate themselves. And it was just like, you're teaching them to feel bad about who they are. And I was like, there's so much projection happening in that, right? Like, because the project doesn't work. You can't, pledge your allegiance. You can't sing all the songs. You can't do all the cookout. I mean, you can do a cookout, but you're not really like celebrating the cookout and waving the flag as mightily as you can if you know that it's a lie.
right?
And, the real fear that I heard was that people were not just afraid about their parents having, lied to them, but like their country has lied to them. Like the history because that means that the history you receive is not the actual full story. And that is, I was just watching this show called Black Cake. It's really beautiful if you get a chance on Hulu, about a woman who's from the Caribbean, and she kind of lives like multiple lives, but she on her deathbed, essentially she tells her children her actual story. But it is like, it's an apocalypse. It ruined, but it also is like a rebirth. Like I think it allows them to really kind of maybe connect some dots. And it does leave a lot of unanswered questions. But I think that this discussion is very similar to that. Like what America actually is forces us to maybe think about who we actually are, what we actually pertain, say we are, how we act in other places, what we've done to our own citizens, and that's important.
Julia, I cannot wait until you debut your podcast or movie.
You're like the third or fourth person.
Can't wait until that happens.
Oh, good Lord. Well, let's get to the next clip so we can, hear some more salient, important words from Fannie Lou Hamer. I believe the next one is the Freedom Farm Cooperative.
Julia, do you mind if I just say one thing about the previous?
Sure, please go ahead.
I just want to like flag for further discussion. Maybe it's another 13th. Maybe it's just like us talking together in other ways. But the power of mythology in who owned what. And I really appreciated you saying like who has a fixed role in relationship to the land. I wrote it down. I was like, oh, right. Like how do we conceive of everybody's role, racialized, of course, in this, in relationship to the place. And right smack in the middle of her statement is a mythology about Jewish people being in what, is then and now known as Israel or occupied Palestine. And that just like it glares at me, because it's something that we're talking a lot about more right now than in other, at least in my lifetime, other years. And that got me thinking about what it means to, colonize in other ways too, like thinking about the Congo and what does it mean for a company to colonize, or multiple companies or business ventures to colonize places. So I just wanted to like flag that, like that mythology's about land relationship is so strong. It's right here in the middle of a critique of the mythology of land ownership, right? That like it's like, yeah, when we question one, sometimes others can go unquestioned because they are so strong. And that one is just right there in the middle.
Yep, absolutely.
And thank you for that. And it reminds me too, who matters, because there is a genocide going on in Africa, in a country in Africa, and we never hear about that on the news. So why is that less important than what is happening in other parts of the world?
Absolutely.
And I think there's just as much to explore in like the multiple genocides that are happening, Congo, occupied Palestine, probably elsewhere that I don't know about because it's not lifted up, right? I think there's a lot to explore in terms of our role. Like I think I hear Adar when that question is brought up, people say, well, the US, and as US citizens, our role in those situations, those genocides are different. And yeah, they're different and we are complicit. Yeah. So I think there's something to uncover in both. And our complicity is present in both in terms of a governmental kind of reaction or aiding and abetting.
Yeah, we in some stuff, y'all. I'm just gonna say we are definitely at a very particular moment in time, and it's heavy. It's very, very heavy. Rebecca, I'm gonna ask you to play that next clip, and then we'll talk about like the farm Cooperative.
To go back to Africa. So now what we plan to do is to grow our own vegetables, is to grow our own cattle, and to grow our own pork, and have 100 houses in that area. Now, there's no way on earth that we can gain any kind of political power unless we have some kind of economic power.
Yeah. So this one is very, I think, a very short but powerful quote. I just recently learned about Fannie Lou Hamer's work with the Freedom Farm Cooperative, and considering, even in Baltimore, I'm hoping we can have an event on this. We have folks who are working on like land sovereignty and community, and which is beautiful. But she gets at something that is so, I think, important for today, right? That we can't really kind of gain any kind of political power unless we have economic power, and that the power, I think, in growing your own food, having your own land. The land is so important, in our relationship with the land is so important to how we're able to live, but really survive. And we've seen an increase, we just kind of talked about in land back discussions, whether that be with Palestinians or indigenous folks here or all over the world in different places. And environmental racism is a huge topic. We've actually done an event on that ourselves. You can look on our YouTube channel for that one. But I think that this is all kind of connected to the land, to being able to have your own, kind of creating your own communities, sustainable communities, and what that means and could look like. And we're seeing that right now. We know that this country has attacked the land of not just indigenous folks, but Black folks, who have had this land in their families for generations. I mentioned that some of my family is from Hilton Head Island. Granted, some of that land has been taken up, taken back, rather, and I put that in quotations, in order to build resorts. We know that Black farmers have lost money and land, over the years, and you see them talking about this and how some of the bills that were allegedly supposed to, protect them actually, were not, they were taking their land. So I think that I would love to hear folks' thoughts around, what Fannie Lou Hamer is speaking about here and what this looks like and what you're seeing maybe in today's society.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that came to me as I was listening to a lot of this speech was something that I later went back and was like, that's the wrong framing. And that was, she was so ahead of her time. And I realized that is very sort of whiteness, a framing of whiteness. And it's what it was, is that more that, and I think this relates to the way we talk about America and all of us and we here too, which is that, cattail, sort of elites, white elites, capitalism. We have sort of moved in a position in which it seems a radical thing to have a food co-op, in which it seems a radical thing to have a piggy bank, which I love the idea of. You could borrow the pig as part of Mrs. Hamer's project. The pig has piglets, and then you give the pig back for the next person to take the pig out. This stuff seems so fresh, but it's not, because she was ahead of her time. She was right in her time, and she was in a Black tradition of cooperative stuff and farming and piglets and all this stuff. And it's just that to my white eyes at this point, that looks so fresh and new, but it's not. And so consistently reminding myself that sometimes it's my misunderstanding of Mrs. Hamer and her time and of Blackness and how it works in different ways from whiteness that is what's really interesting. So she's continually challenging me, I think.
Yeah, I think was one of the things that kind of just came to my mind is that, like, what she's describing, like, this is how people survived, right? This is how people lived in community with each other. And that, the mention of, like, I think when we see co-ops now, and usually they're kind of like led by like, white folks, it's like, yeah, like survival looks really radical, on other people. Like survival, but it looks like radical work when, you're getting a flyer and, like certain people on that flyer. And I think it's important for us to recognize, like, there have always been people who have been doing food co-ops. There have always been people who are doing this work. It's just that now we're seeing, for one, an increase in people needing that. It's who has access to do that, who has the ability to have land to grow food, and then say we're going to do a co-op. Or there are, like, who gets like the support or the grant dollars to do that, right? It's like, and so looking at this from multiple angles, like, it's great that people I think are doing that work, but who is actually leading it? Who actually, needs to really be poured into, and who's actually being poured into, and who's the face.
And if I can also say, and who doesn't get violently shut down by state apparatuses? Who doesn't get labeled as terrorists? Who are the people who are not murdered? There were more than a dozen race massacres in the United States, right? We hear about Rosewood in Florida. We hear about Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. We don't hear about Atlanta, Georgia, and the race massacre there. We don't hear about Wilmington, North Carolina, and a race massacre there. We don't hear about Colfax, Louisiana, and the race massacre there. We don't hear about Elaine, Arkansas, and the race massacre there, right? We hear about the massacre of the Black Panthers, who did all of the food drives, who took care of community, who California changed the gun laws when Black people started carrying guns in California. They were labeled a terrorist group. The FBI went in and murdered teenagers and people in their early 20s in their beds as they were sleeping. Did it in plain sight, got away with it. White America cheered when that happened. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the Nation of Islam. They have been like talking about growing their own, having their own businesses, doing all like that for generations. And we look down on them. When it is a white co-op, a white community farm, a white collective, oh, that's nice. They're taking care of the land. When Black people do the same thing, oh my God, terrorist group, oh my God, they're self-segregating now. And then here comes the state and federal government. We need to put them on a terrorist watch list. So, we don't acknowledge that there have always been generations of Black people doing just that and congregating in communities to stave against white terrorism. And all of a sudden, just that act of saying we're going to do for ourselves brings the state political and policing apparatus down on them. And it only is allowed to happen in the United States because white people say that it is okay through their apathy, through their inaction, through their, well, they must have been doing something wrong, through the assumption of guilt. Those things are important.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Let's go to the next clip. We want to make sure we're able to get through what we have here. So for the next one, I think this one actually leads very well into what we've just been kind of talking about.
And all the qualifications that you have to become a part
of the co-op and you have to be full. This is the first kind of program that has ever been sponsored in this country in letting local people do their thing themselves. Because I've seen government-funded programs with cooperatives, and after you get through making the proposal with a stack of paper this high, and after you finish paying all the administration from $25,000 to $12,000, it'd be exactly $2 to go to the program.
All right. This one is actually one of my favorites. I have, if you've worked in like nonprofits before, I feel like there's something that touches your soul when you hear this. If you've ever had like grant writing, absolutely. And how this is still extremely relevant today. I am, as most people know, I am finishing up my MSW next month. Thank God I graduate. But even I think in this kind of conversation around, you're like, oh, well, how do we actually help communities? How do we help people who, you know, who need the most vulnerable? And when it comes to money, especially, we deploy all of these programs into these communities. We're just like, okay, I get that, right? I get the importance of that. But I also am kind of like, well, why don't we just give the people in the community the money? Like the folks who are closest to the issue, we know historically best know, you know, the issue and how to actually fix it. And I think that it's important when we think about, you know, nonprofits and nonprofit industrial complex, how that has kind of, you know, I think stunted and installed growth and support, like real growth and support for communities that need the most help and need the most support. And so the idea of letting local people do their work, like letting them actually own their community, letting them actually do the work in their communities. Obviously, they want support, sure, but that certain things, like we can just, you know, they got it, they can have the money. Like, you know, why can't they use the money in the way that they see fit? And so we were kind of going over these quotes. Some of the things that really came up for us was, of course, like the difference between local people doing their own thing versus states, you know, the states, I think, supporting or leading the charge in that work, people making their own decisions without political intervention. And, you know, I also think part of that reason we were talking about is, and, you know, kind of treating Black folks like infants, right? You know, like, oh, well, they won't know what to do with the money. So, you know, we got to hold the money. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, actually, based off of what I've seen historically, every time I hear about the debt ceiling or how much debt we're in, I'm not sure I should be listening to y'all. I'm not sure that's the way it actually works. And so I think that just the idea of local people, I think also it takes a level of community in order for that to happen. And so, you know, I think we definitely have pockets now, but especially as I think about what's happening in our political sphere and the impact that will have on myself, but definitely communities surrounding me. Where are we as local people actually working and building together that when if something does happen, that we're able to take care of ourselves? And I feel like that's actually part of what I'm kind of taking from this quote as well. So I'd love to hear other people's thoughts.
One thing that,
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so interested in Johanna and Reynald, and they've been listening intently. I'm so interested in like where this is hitting with you all and what you all want to share.
Sorry, my internet really isn't.
You can put it in the chat if you need to. You know, I think Mercury's in retrograde.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's been doing its big thing.
Yeah, chat is good too. Reynald, where are you with all of this today? Reynald is not with us. Should he go in the waiting room? I'm not sure where we go with this.
We usually just move on because we're uncertain, you know,
Okay.
what's going on. He
Yeah.
may be in a place where he can't speak or, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, anybody else's thoughts?
And Harriet was going to say something too.
I was just going to say the thing that really stood out to me, like the bulk of this is about setting up programs and sort of from the programmatic side. The first sentence feels like it speaks to the program participant side, right? Like proving that you're poor and that you're in the right county. And what if you don't have an ID or proof of income? And just like, as someone who has applied for assistance programs for myself, for my family, and for others as a part of my paid work, it is ridiculous, right? It is so ridiculous. Just speaking some to that, and one thing that I loved about her programs and programs that, you know, others like her have come up with is the qualifications were, are you Black and are you poor? Do you want food? And
Yeah.
then if there's food left over, are you white and are you poor and do you want food? Boom. Right? There was a clear process of how to engage with the assistants. And you knew if you qualified or if you didn't right off the bat. There was no like long application stacks of paper on the participant side too. And I think that is some of the beauty that faith, like just handing resources over to folks who are like, we know how people will or won't try to hustle this program. We got this. We're going to have it be the lowest barrier possible. And then, yeah, sticking to that as the value, like lowest barrier possible. Don't have stacks of paperwork for people to fill out. If you want like a reduced membership at the YMCA, you have to get like a master's degree in paperwork first. Like, why are we doing that? You know?
Yeah.
Like that's not a good way to run programs for people who are already strapped for time and energy.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what I think Chris was saying about the earlier too, about like these things are not complicated, not really. It's like, and so why do we make them complicated? When we know that, especially when we know that people need help, or when people need to eat. And so Johanna said, I was thinking about how the last quote hits on many helping programs, raises fear of being swindled that leads to a lot of bureaucracy. Absolutely. Like, oh, well, what are they doing with the money? What are they doing? Like, how many people have they actually served? Like, you know, is it actually worth that? And I think I said this even when we were kind of getting prepared for this event. I had gone to a talk, I think sometime last year, and someone had said, you know, if Harriet Tubman was alive today, she would not be able to get a grant for the work that she did, right? Like that her saying, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the plantations, I'm gonna do my call. People already know I'm coming on this time of in day, and we're gonna leave and we're gonna escape the freedom, right? And if she had to like get money from a nonprofit or an organization to do that, they would be like, well, how do they know what time? Like, you know, are you sure? Like, well, we need to see. It's like we like quite literally trying to free ourselves would be paperwork, right? It's like, and so when I think about it that way, I'm like, sometimes it's just someone being like, look, you got some land. Are you poor? You need food? Here's food. Like,
Oh, I'm sorry. Meredith's comment is just like such a wow for me. The thing about moving away from shared community spaces. And I want us to look at that from a structural perspective, right? Because we hear all of this conversation about, you know, the individualism thing, that I can make it on my own. You should be able to make it on your own, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And all of that really sets the stage for the state and the country being able to say, we should not have any social services programs or anything because everybody has an equal opportunity to make it, even though we know that's not true. When we move away from shared community and our obligation to each other as residents in this shared space of country, and just make it be about, you know, the individual and us being able to do for ourselves. We have seen the result of that right now with all of the movement away from shared social programs. And so these, even this, and this gets also for me gets back to what Harriet is saying about American mythology, because the whole myth of individualism is bound up in that American mythology. So our embrace of, you know, we don't need the shared spaces because everybody should be able to do it on their own. We are doing ourselves a disservice that we see in real time, with more money being put into bombs and military and less money being put into social service programs. And we even see it now into the, okay, and there are certain, there is a movement in the federal government even to abolish Social Security.
Yep.
So all of this types of conversation, this is backfiring on us big time. But because we don't have a structural point of view, we sleep on these things until it is too late to connect the dots.
I think someone said, also it was Jamie who wrote that quote, but I wanted to give her credit. But I think someone said at the last meeting that, like, and maybe it was Harriet or Dan, I don't remember, but that like white people will hurt themselves just to hurt Black people. And that definitely, like, Adar, what you said, like, rang true for that. And then the other thing I was thinking about with this was like how often whiteness and people in power will try to suppress Black people time and time again. And that just felt like a theme throughout kind of like all of Fannie Lou Hamer's quotes so far. And then it really got me thinking about just like the legalization process and like how like the legalization of cannabis and how many white people are profiting off of just like, you know, selling cannabis, and how many Black people are still in jail. How many folks from Central and South America are killed, jailed, like just kind of like, I don't know. So, and that's just kind of like one example of what I feel like Fannie Lou Hamer is saying is like, just let us do it ourselves. And then white people are like, oh no, it's fine. We'll make a process and then we'll make all this money off of it. And it's not going to help anyone but ourselves.
America is nothing but consistent.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're gonna, let's see.
Wait, did we go to Johanna's comment?
Oh, you know what? We did not. Let's me go back up. I was thinking about how the last quote hits. Yeah, we did, like, the racist fear of being singled. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. That is so true. But and that fear always comes into play when it's Black people. It never comes into play when we're talking about white people, what white people may or may not be doing. Right. You know, we started hearing about welfare queens and all of this kind of stuff when they needed a Black face to start stripping away that program. We did not hear about that when the buzz was that it was mostly white people on welfare, which it still is, by the way. And then, you know, the country supported it. And America, another consistent part about America, it has always been willing to sacrifice some white people in order to maintain the status, the racialized status quo for all white people. And that is not an individual reality or conversation. It is a structural one.
And before we go on to the next, she also said, from the quote, we can see this predates Reagan's presidency.
Yes.
So this is not, you know, this is, you know, as Adar said, this is nothing but consistent. Rebecca, I'm going to have us go to the next quote as we start to kind of wrap up. I know we are pressed for time. So.
We lost it.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, here it is.
I can't stand today not with dignity and sang the national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hated? Poor oppressed people throughout this country don't have anything to hate. And I just sing it in my own way when I have to stand and sing that song. Because you know as well as I know that America is sick and man is on the critical list. And when people can be shot down at a college like Kent and a college like Jackson State College by people that's dodging the arms, it's something very wrong. Draft guards. Not only have they dodged being drafted, but they was caught looting in southern Mississippi after the storm.
Oh, well. I mean, so certainly, this is an interesting topic. I want to spend a couple minutes before we go to our last slide. I think with one of her most important quotes, but this one is so interesting because we see, I think in the last like 5 or 6 or 7 years, that the national anthem and the fight around the national anthem has only continued. We saw, obviously, we've seen the Olympics when people, were either putting up fists during the song, but we saw more recently with Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, his, kneeling, which an army that told him to do as opposed to sitting down, by the way. People very rarely bring that part up. And then we also saw just recently, I think in Louisiana, during like the college basketball, they were upset that the teams were not on the floor during the national anthem. And he wrote the local universities and colleges in the area for scholarship students, that they were not there to take their scholarship. It's important for them to be standing and listening during the national anthem. And it's very blatant, and I think it gets to that mythology that we've talked about. So anybody else's thought?
Listen, I mean, again, the resistance behind this, even standing to the national anthem, Rose Robinson, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, Winona, what is her name? Tyrus Arnaldo Morales. There's a whole host of athletes from way back when. Jackie Robinson, who never wanted to stand for the national anthem, knowing that the national anthem had nothing to offer them. So what we see is not new. And she was, part of it. Yep, poor people in America don't have anything to stand for, to salute, to hail. The other thing, that has been, at least on Black Twitter, because it came from white media, has been the whole thing about the Black national anthem. There was a Black national anthem before the U.S. national anthem was ratified as a national anthem. There was a Black national anthem, and a Black national anthem that speaks of freedom, that speaks of dignity, that speaks of the struggles of our people, that we all salute and stand for, because that is our journey. I've never known it as anything other than the Black national anthem. My parents never knew it as anything other than the Black national anthem. My grandparents never knew it anything other than a Black national anthem. So this whole thing about, this national anthem, which only recently got rid of this verse about enslavement that was created by an enslaver. America wants to forget that. They also want to forget that enslavement, the Jim Crow, Jane Crow, Black codes, all of that happened under this flag, not the Confederate flag, but the U.S. flag with the U.S. anthem. So this whole pearl clutching about the national anthem, I just wish that white America and their white adjacent friends and family would would read this Fannie Lou Hamer quote, because nobody could say that she was quote unquote, it came at the time of quote unquote wokeness. People have been fighting, Black people have been fighting against the thuggery of the United States ever since we have been in this land. Those foundational Black Americans, I want to make that point. The Black people who came through enslavement, Jim and Jane Crow, who have been fighting so that other Black immigrants and other non-Black immigrants of color could come here with all of the rights and opportunities that foundational Black Americans still do not have, or only have in part and disproportionately. And I say that with this one example: affirmative action in colleges or any place else, people who want to say, yes, yes, we have inclusion, most of those are of Black people who are immigrants to the United States, who were not foundational Black Americans, who were the ones who fought for the rights that they now enjoy without any stake or blood in the game.
And I think, yeah, and Harry, this is another great clip for diving into the mythology and the role of this performance of the anthem and saluting and the standing and all of that to the mythology of greatness, hero, white USA. Absolutely. It is a part of the myth building, right? That we're all a part of it. Like, and you're taught to sing it. And, you know, even though it has words in it and you actually read the entire thing, it's like, actually, maybe there's a reason we're not singing the whole song. But I think it's important for us to think about how performance is also a part of, you know, colonization and myth making and allegiance. Like, what does it actually mean to be a part of a nation? So thank you for pointing that out. We're going to go to our next one. I know we're running over a bit. I just want to kind of get to this last quote before we do our last slide. We're going to give two more. And just like, I think one of her most pertinent, you know, important lines that she's kind of known for. So I'm going to ask Rebecca to cue that up.
We plan to be in this country with you, whether you want us here or not, and we plan to make this a better place for all the citizens, both black, red, white, and brown, and we want you to I've never been hung up in all of my work in just fighting for the black. I've never been hung up in that because I know that a lot of black people have given their lives. But I also know it was people like Andy Goodman, Michael Swerner, and James Chaney that gave their lives in the state of Mississippi, that all of us would have a better chance. And when they died there, they didn't just die for me, but they died for you, because your freedom is shackled and chained to mine. And until I'm free, you are not free either. And if you think you are free, you drive down through Mississippi with your Wisconsin license plate, and you will see what I'm talking about.
All right, so I'm forgetting the author, but the person, she wrote a book about Fannie Lou Hamer, and it was called, you know, Until I'm Free. And I think it is such a, you know, it's a good collection of all the quotes that we've kind of discussed, you know, from the first part into this part. But this was ultimately, I think, her message. It was like, you know, until I am free, you are not free either. That, you know, your freedom is shackled to mine. You know, like, that is a beautiful, I think, and very important thing to kind of think about, that our freedoms are linked because our humanity is linked, right, in a lot of ways. Like, if, you know, if I'm treated inhumanely, Like it's only a matter of time for people who have power are able to treat you inhumanely as well, right? And so the idea that we're actually all connected, and that like it's about our humanity, that's what we should be focusing on. I would love to hear people's thoughts on this one and anything that comes up for them.
Yeah, this quote, I sort of have, we've talked about this a bit, and such a complicated relationship to this quote. I kind of love it. And at the same time, as a white person, I know how many white people respond to this kind of thing. We're all shackled together. We're all in it together. And I believe that there are ways in which that is profoundly true. And yet I don't feel like white people can be trusted with this kind of quote, because we love to go to town on this quote. I am shackled to the Black folks, and I too, and and no, but because we never ever live up to it. We don't live up to that. I don't know that we can be trusted with this quote. So while the same thing, and I'm thinking about so many things, that point that was in the chat earlier and that Harriet had made, white supremacy profoundly damages white people, and yet we choose it over and over in so many ways. And yeah, so just really complicated. And I feel like this is a quote that I as a white person need to interrogate my own response to very carefully, very closely, and see what's going on with that. So it's really deep.
And because we've discussed this before, and as we were talking about this, one of the things that I was sharing is that how this resonates for me is, yeah, I'm with Dana 100%. And I think that until I am free, you're not free either, that what this means in terms of white people, well, what it means in terms of people who are not white, is that we really are not free economically, socially. We're not free with the diversity of choices, the opportunities to succeed or fail that white people are given. The second, third, fourth, fifth, 24th, 40th, 100th chances, 97 chances in criminal charges, if you will, that other people are given. But what it means for white people in that you're not free is that with buying into and prioritizing the status quo of whiteness and what it means in the United States, when your whiteness is chosen, you may not be actively choosing it. You may hate everything that it stands for, but as long as you're on the sidelines of the struggle, there is also a way in which you lose your humanity, because you sit by and watch things happen and say, oh, wow, that's really too bad. I wish things were different. Things should be different. But you're not willing to give up a daggone thing in order for things to be different. So you are complicit. The work that a lot of white people do, especially a lot of white advocates and activists, you're comfortable in multiracial circles because of what your being there says about you. See, look at me. Aren't I like the ish, because I am like here with these Black people side by side in the trenches. But you won't go to a MAGA event and do some organizing. You won't go where it is uncomfortable for you. And meanwhile, Black people have to go places where it is uncomfortable and physically dangerous for us every single daggone day. Those things are not the same. And until white people start interrogating this quote from that perspective, then, as Dana says, it will just be another pat myself on the back because I am doing the bare minimum at little risk to myself and thinking that I'm really doing something really, really hot.
And also, I really want to make sure I say this, that, it is not about, I think, the saving of Black people. You're really literally about saving yourself. It's like that, what we're really talking about is that when I say that your humanity is connected to mine, it means that, like, if I'm over here suffering, it's only a matter of time before you suffer as well. And that so I don't want people to think that when they're kind of doing the performance of allyship or anti-racism, which I think is part of also I think the blowback right now, why the blowback feels so huge, because there are a lot of people who were like, oh yeah, this is important work, I'm an ally, I deserve. They put it on their buildings, and everybody had bumper stickers, and all the books were sold out, and like that's great, but like the actual work is like, I'm trying to make sure that I'm treating my fellow human the way they deserve to be treated, and that the system itself is screwing all of us. Like, that's the reality. Um, there are it's the reason why things like affirmative action or other things are supposed to be like, oh, it's for Black people, were being beneficial to a lot of white folks, right? It's a reason why there's a come up for lots of people when the most marginalized and the most vulnerable are censored. It benefits all of us. But if we're beholden to these fixed kind of roles or ideas about certain people or identities, then we are only going to continue to have this problem. And so I think that, as Adara kind of brought up, I do watch a lot of TV and movies, and I recommend that people watch Andor if they have not. It's one of my favorites of the last couple of years. But he talks a lot about freedom being, it's an idea, right? And if you have to work for that. Like, this is not just like an inevitability. Like, you have to actually work for justice. You have to work to be inclusive. You have to work to be, diverse. You have to work for equity. And if we don't work for it, we get what we get. And that's where the consistency is. So it calls into question, I think, America's never actually been a place of freedom and equality and all of that. Like, it's had to fight. People have had to fight for that, right? And so if we want to continue to see, a better world, not so much just for us, but for folks who are going to be here after we've, been long gone, that fight has to continue. And we've got to be very honest with ourselves that our freedom is linked to each other. So we all got work to do, right? It's like white folks, Black folks, other folks of color, no matter what your identity is, we all have work to I think, free ourselves from these kind of very limiting ideas about our humanity. So I think that, she was definitely letting us know and letting folks then know what it was. So before we leave, we do, I think, have one more clip, and I think this is more of a reflection piece for folks to think about as we're kind of wrapping up, and then we'll wrap up our time.
And as I close, I would like for you to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, as we have paid such a big price, ask yourself, must I be carried to the sky on flowery beds of ease while others fight to win the prize and sail through bloody seas? Thank you.
All right. So reflection is a huge part of growth. I think in all the topics.
And as I close, I would like for you
that we've all kind of like discussed today, reflecting on our role, our proximity to power, our role in this, in this country, in this work. Reflection is a big piece. I think that sometimes we can all get wrapped up in like the language and, being at events just like these, which is always good. We obviously want you all to keep coming to our 13th events and tell a friend. But also reflection, deep, I think personal reflection is important for growth, particularly I think when it comes to our identities, when it comes to our privileges, and what that actually means in connection to our neighbors. If we're saying we're good people, part of it is understanding ourselves. And must I be carried to the sky on a flowery bed of ease while others fight to win the prize and sail through bloody seas? I think is a perfect ender. It's a perfect question for the work that is definitely happening right now, but definitely for the work ahead. What do we want this country to be? And who do we, as we say we want it to be a certain way, are we actually doing that work? Are we doing that labor? And if we aren't, how can we? If we're doing some already, how can we do more? It doesn't have to look like everybody's. My work does not look like Adar's work or Dana's work, but it is work nonetheless. But as long as we have a common goal. But who is doing the work is, I think, a really important question to ask ourselves. So I'm gonna like have a couple folks if they want to share their thoughts on this, and then we're gonna close out.
Julia, I would just say, I just want to thank everybody who is here, because I am very conscious of the fact that this is how we build that beloved community, by having these types of honest conversations where everybody is reflecting and sharing together, instead of just sitting and being silent, right? That we're putting ourselves out there, trusting that we've got each other, and that what we're building can stand the weight of conversations that are difficult or uncomfortable. And so the level of trust and willingness of spirit that everybody has shown in terms of their participation, all of the things that you offered have made this conversation that much more special. And so I really leave feeling hopeful and rejuvenated. So thank you all for that on this Saturday.
It's always good for a Saturday morning. Normally I could be in my bed still, y'all. I will relax Saturday morning, but it's been lovely. And I do also feel invigorated and inspired and reminded of those that came before us and the incredibly hard work that they did. But more importantly, where do I fit in that? And it's a good reminder to keep doing that, right? So I want to thank you all for attending. I hope that you learned something new. I definitely recommend actually going and reading and watching as much about Fannie Lou Hamer as possible. She is an incredible, incredible woman. And also, don't stop there. There are so many other people that she worked with who we don't get to hear about. So making sure you kind of delve into those, and hopefully we can maybe do some events similar to this one on those folks who she was working with in collaboration with. I hope that you can also join us for April's discussion on onboarding and retention. That's going to be happening next Tuesday, April 16th. You can, of course, use the QR code here if you are interested. Conversations with BRJA, onboarding and retention strategies for an inclusive workplace. I know a lot of organizations are still kind of doing this work and still very much dedicated, and as we see anti-DEI and fights against anti-racism and anti-oppression kind of just continuing, it's important that we hold our workplaces accountable and tell them, like, this is important work for us, especially if we're going to be working and serving human beings. So
Yeah, Julia, wait.
Go ahead.
Can I, this is a plug for people coming. So it's a study that I just started to read this morning. And do you all remember the workplace study that was done a long time ago about the difference between hiring around name? And so more white people got, okay. So there's a new study that has come out. It was just released. And guess what? Of course, it's the same phenomenon. But in organizations do it less, but still white people get called back, or people with white sounding names get called in for interviews more. So it ties into the entire conversation about recruitment, about onboarding, about retention, and about merit. Is merit in a name? Or is merit in the experiences? And the studies show that merit is in the racialized name. So our onboarding and retention, and when that racialization carries over into the organizational culture, that is what we will be discussing, and we hope to see you there.
Awesome. Next slide, Rebecca. We hope to see you for our May 13th event. It's going to be on Monday, May 13th. At 6 p.m. I don't think we have an actual title just yet, but look out for that to be coming. And we hope to see you online for that. And I think we have a last slide. You can check our event page out for more information on all of our events. And also don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, where you can see past 13th events and discussions. Hopefully something there will pique your interest, and you'll learn something new. And don't forget to share, and also invite folks and let folks know what we do on the 13th. We would love to have, I think, more folks coming. I know people get tired of Zoom, but we hope to have, I think, more important conversations as we're going through a very, I think, intense 2024. So I hope to see you all at the next one, and I want to thank you all for your time. Oh, wait, and we also love your financial support. So if you want to use this QR code once again to help us continue this awesome work and continue events like these, please make sure you support. You can either do that monthly or one-time donor, however is accepted and appreciated. We hope to see you again.
Thank you all. Have a great Saturday.
Thanks so much.